72 hours. That's how long I had before the non-compete my brother and his attorney drafted would take effect and strip me of everything I'd spent 11 years building. My brother stood at the head of the conference table. Our conference table. The one I picked out from a showroom in downtown Austin when we were still operating out of a spare bedroom. And he slid the termination letter across the polished wood like it was nothing. Like it was a grocery receipt. "We're restructuring," he said. "Your role is being eliminated." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The same face I'd known my whole life. The same jaw. The same way he tilted his head slightly when he was lying. I'd forgotten he did that. Or maybe I'd just stopped paying attention. "My role," I said. "Head of product development. We're consolidating it under operations." He didn't look up from the folder in front of him. "You'll receive a generous severance, 12 weeks, full benefits continuation." Sitting next to him was Veronica. She wasn't looking at me either. She was making small notes on a legal pad, her handwriting neat and looping, like she was in a lecture hall somewhere. She'd been brought in 8 months ago as a strategic consultant. She'd been sleeping with my brother for at least 6. I knew because I'd found the hotel receipt in the company Amex statement. I hadn't said anything. I should have. "You can't eliminate my role," I said. "I hold 18% of outstanding shares. That's in the operating agreement. We're not touching your shares." He finally looked at me. "You'll remain a minority stakeholder. You just won't have an operational role." Minority stakeholder. 11 years ago, when our parents' medical bills were eating through everything and my brother came to me with a business plan sketched on the back of a Denny's placemat, I was the one who called in every favor. I was the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning learning pharmaceutical regulatory compliance from scratch because we couldn't afford a consultant. I built our first client pipeline by cold calling hospital procurement officers for 4 months straight. My brother gave the speeches. I wrote them. Hartwell Biosupply had 47 employees, 3 regional distribution contracts with major hospital networks, and a proprietary inventory management system that I had designed personally. It was called Sentry. It tracked pharmaceutical supply chains in real time, flagged expiration risks, integrated with hospital ERP systems, and had saved our clients an average of $2.3 million annually in waste reduction. 3 of our competitors had tried to license it. We declined every time. Sentry was the reason we were worth $14 million, and here was my brother in a room with his girlfriend and 2 attorneys I'd never met, telling me I was restructured out. I picked up the termination letter. I read it carefully. 72 hours before the non-compete activated. 12 weeks of severance. And a clause at the bottom that I had to sign over, operational access to all company systems, as a condition of receiving that severance. I set the letter back down. "I need to review this with my own attorney," I said. "Of course." He nodded like he'd expected that, like he planned for it. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and walked out of the conference room. I took the stairs instead of the elevator because I needed those 30 seconds to breathe. When I pushed through the lobby doors into the October air outside, my hands were completely steady. They should have wondered about that. Here's something people don't tell you about building a company. From nothing, you learn to plan for betrayal before you can afford to name it as such. About 2 years before that conference room, I started noticing things. Small things at first. My name left off an email chain with a regional hospital director I'd personally cultivated over 18 months. A product roadmap meeting I wasn't invited to. My brother referring to Sentry in a pitch deck as our proprietary platform. No mention of who designed it. I told myself it was growing pains. Companies scale and roles shift, and nobody means anything by the shorthand they use in presentations. Then I found the Amex receipt. And then, about 4 months before he fired me, I overheard a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come back to the office on a Saturday to pull some compliance files, and his door was half open. He was talking to someone, Veronica, I found out later, about a transition timeline, about how 18% wouldn't be an obstacle, about how they'd structure it so the system access transfers cleanly. I stood in the hallway for about 30 seconds. Then I went to my office, closed the door, and started working. I want to be very clear about something. I did not sabotage Hartwell Biosupply. I did not plant anything malicious. I did not delete a single file, corrupt a single database, or do anything that could be characterized as harmful to the company or its clients. What I did was much simpler. Sentry, the system I designed, ran on a licensing architecture I had built from the ground up. When I first developed it, I had registered the core intellectual property under my own name, a decision that had been documented in our original operating agreement as my individual contribution to the company. The company had an exclusive license to use Sentry, but the license was in my name. The source code was in my name, and buried in the licensing structure, in language I had written myself 3 years prior, was a provision that the license required annual renewal through my direct authorization. The renewal was due in 61 days. I had never renewed it automatically. Every year, I had signed off on it manually, quietly, a 5-minute task I did in January. Nobody else knew the renewal existed because nobody else had ever looked at the original licensing agreement closely enough to find it. I spent those 72 hours before the non-compete activated doing 3 things. First, I hired an intellectual property attorney. Not a local firm, a boutique practice in Chicago that specialized in pharmatech. I overnighted them the original licensing documentation, the operating agreement, and a detailed timeline of my contributions to Sentry's development. Second, I called a contact I'd maintained for years at MedCore Systems, a competing distributor out of Nashville. We'd turned down their licensing offer twice. I told them I was available for a conversation. Third, I did not renew the Sentry license. I signed the severance agreement. I walked out of that building on a Thursday afternoon with a cardboard box that held a desk plant, a framed photo of my parents, and a coffee mug my niece had painted for me in the 3rd grade. I drove home. I made dinner. I watched half an episode of something I don't remember. And then I waited. The call started on a Tuesday, not to me, to my attorney. My brother's legal team reached out first. Something about clarifying the terms of the system access transfer. My attorney responded with a copy of the original licensing agreement and a polite note explaining that Sentry's operational license would lapse in 43 days without my personal renewal authorization. I heard later from someone still at the company, a logistics coordinator named Felix who'd been with us since year 3 and felt genuinely terrible about what had happened, that the reaction in the executive suite was something to see. Veronica apparently had not known about the licensing structure. Neither had the attorneys my brother hired. They had assumed that because Sentry lived on company servers and had been used exclusively by Hartwell for 3 years, the company owned it outright. That's a reasonable assumption to make if you haven't read the original operating agreement carefully. My brother had not read it carefully. He'd signed it in 2018 at a kitchen table while our father was in his 2nd round of chemotherapy, and neither of us was sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I don't think he ever went back and read it again. I had. The next call came directly to my cell, my brother. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to talk, that there had been a miscommunication, that he hoped we could resolve this like family. I listened to the voicemail once, deleted it, and forwarded the number to my attorney. Meanwhile, I was not sitting still. In the 5 weeks since I'd been terminated, I had done the following. I'd signed a consulting agreement with MedCore Systems to advise on their supply chain software modernization at a day rate that was significantly more than my annual salary at Hartwell had been. I'd been contacted by 2 other regional medical distributors who'd heard through the industry grapevine that I was available, and my IP attorney had filed the preliminary documentation to register Sentry as a standalone commercial product under my sole proprietorship. Hartwell Biosupply was still running Sentry, but it was running on borrowed time, and my brother's team now knew it. The 43 days became 30, King 15. I received a formal legal letter. It argued that the licensing structure was invalid, that Sentry had been developed using company resources, that my individual IP registration was improper. It was 11 pages long and clearly very expensive to produce. My attorney responded in 4 pages. Clean, surgical. The development log showing I'd begun Sentry's core architecture before Hartwell was even formally incorporated. The Git repository timestamps. The original licensing language, underlined. 10 days before the renewal deadline, my brother called again. This time I picked up. He sounded tired. The bravado was gone, that particular quality he had, the confidence that had always made him good in a room, the ease that I had spent years quietly scaffolding with research and preparation and unglamorous work. It was gone from his voice. "I need to talk to you about Sentry," he said. "I know," I said. "What do you want?" I had thought about this question for a long time, not with anger. I want to be honest about that. There was a point early on, maybe that first week, where I'd been angry enough that it scared me a little. But anger is not a strategy. I'd spent those weeks thinking clearly, talking to my attorney, reviewing my options, and arriving at what I actually wanted. "I want full ownership of Sentry," I said, "including all derivative systems developed during my tenure. I want a formal acknowledgement of my founding contributions in any company documentation going forward. And I want the original 18% converted to 26%. Silence on the other end. "That's not, you have 9 days," I said. "After that, the license lapses and Hartwell will need to negotiate a commercial licensing arrangement for continued use of a system your 3 hospital network contracts depend on. My attorney can give yours the rate sheet if that's helpful." I wasn't bluffing. I had already had the rate sheet prepared. He called back in 48 hours. We settled in 7 days. Full IP transfer to my name, amended operating agreement reflecting my founding contributions, 26% equity stake, and a new consulting agreement in which Hartwell licensed Sentry from me directly, at a rate structured by my attorney for a renewable 3-year term. Veronica left the company within 2 months. I heard she relocated to Atlanta. I don't think about her much. People ask me sometimes, friends who knew what happened, my attorney over lunch once, why I didn't just walk away entirely. I had the MedCore contract. I had the IP. I could have let the license lapse, watched Hartwell scramble, and built something entirely my own. Honestly, I thought about it. There were mornings in those first weeks where I'd sit with my coffee and map it out. What it would look like to start from scratch, to put my name on the door, to never have to sit across a conference table from my brother again. But Hartwell had 47 employees. Felix, who'd been with us since year 3 and coached his kids Little League on weekends. Donna in compliance, who'd taken the job to be closer to her mother. People who had nothing to do with what happened in that conference room. And I realized something. I didn't want to burn it down. I wanted it to be right. What my brother did was a betrayal, a calculated one. And I genuinely believe that he knew it when he did it. But I also know the version of him who sat with me in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours while our father was in surgery, and who cried in the parking lot afterward when he thought no one could see him. People are not one thing. The 26% is mine now, in writing, with documentation behind it. Sentry is mine, licensed back to the company I built, generating revenue every quarter. My consulting practice has 3 clients and a waiting list. My brother and I don't have Sunday dinners anymore. We have quarterly business calls and occasionally a brief, careful conversation in the hallway at family events. It's not what I would have chosen. But I chose what I actually had the power to choose, and I chose it with my eyes open. There's one more thing. A few weeks after the settlement, I was going through some old files. Paper files, the kind we'd kept in the early days before everything moved to cloud storage, and I found the original business plan. The one he'd drawn up on the back of that Denny's placemat. He'd kept it apparently, and it had ended up in a box with some of my files during a move. His handwriting on the outside of the folded paper, Hartwell Biosupply, our plan. Inside, in the margins in different handwriting, my handwriting were the actual numbers, the market size calculations, the compliance cost projections, the client acquisition model. I stood in my home office holding that piece of paper for a long time. Then I photographed it, filed the original in my records, and put a copy in a frame. It hangs on the wall behind my desk now, not as a reminder of what he took, as a reminder of what I built and what I made sure was mine. I used to think that betrayal was something that happened to you suddenly. A door slamming, a voice raised, a moment you could point to and say, that's where it broke. But looking back now, I don't think it works that way. It accumulates. It's the email chain you weren't copied on, the meeting that happened without you, the pitch deck where your name quietly disappeared. By the time my brother slid that letter across the table, the betrayal had already been underway for months. I just hadn't let myself name it yet. What I've come to understand is that the people who underestimate you are almost always the people who needed you most. My brother didn't push me out because I was weak. He pushed me out because Sentry worked, because the clients stayed, because when he walked into rooms and gave those speeches, people believed him, and he knew, somewhere underneath all of that the reason they believed him was sitting in an office down the hall running the numbers. That kind of debt is uncomfortable to carry. Some people pay it, others find a way to make it disappear. He thought he was making me disappear. But here's the thing about building something from scratch. You know every corner of it. You know where the weight-bearing walls are. You know which beam, if you pulled it, would bring the whole structure down. Not because you want to destroy it. I never wanted that. But because you built it, and you never forgot how. I didn't act out of rage. I want to be honest about that. Because I think there's a version of this story where I become someone I'm not proud of. There were mornings that first week where I was angry enough to make decisions I would have regretted. I didn't make them. I made myself slow down, talk to people who were smarter than me about the specific things I needed, and think about what I actually wanted, not just what would hurt him most. That discipline, that pause between the wound and the response, I think that's the whole thing. That's where the outcome lived. What happened to Veronica, to the plan she and my brother had built, wasn't luck. It was the natural result of a decision made without full information, executed against someone who had been paying attention for 11 years. Actions produce consequences. Not always on our preferred timeline, not always in the shape we expect. But the structure of cause and effect doesn't take breaks. My brother made choices. Veronica made choices. And those choices eventually met the reality of what they'd left out of their calculations, which was me. Felix still works at Hartwell. Donna is still in compliance. The 47 people who had nothing to do with any of it are still there, doing their jobs. That matters to me more than I expected it to. I think about that Denny's placemat sometimes, his handwriting on the outside. Mine in the margins, that was always the truth of it. The vision and the work, and which one of us was doing which. I'm not bitter about that anymore. I just know it now, clearly in a way I didn't let myself know it before. Sentry is mine. The license is mine. The 26% is in writing. And every morning I sit down at my desk and look at that framed photograph of a grease-stained placemat and I think, I built that. Not half of it. Not the invisible half. All of it. That's enough. That has always been enough.